Alright, thank you everybody for getting on here. Welcome to this Tsunami live stream. This is never something I've done before, to live stream about a tsunami, but I'll leave it right here. You can just take a look at this as I get this set up here. We've got a magnitude 8.8 earthquake off the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia. It happened earlier this evening, as in 4:25 p.m. Pacific time. You can see mega thrust earthquake right there, and that is what started all of this. Let me just get this shared out on social media real quick, so just give me a minute here. Yeah, let's get this shared out. Thank you everybody for joining in here. So as you can see, we had a megathrust earthquake off the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia earlier this evening, and that is what has brought this tsunami. You can see as we look here at the National Tsunami Warning Center site here, you can see we got tsunami advisories in effect for the Aleutian Islands all the way toward the Alaska Peninsula there, and then we have it in effect along the Pacific coast from British Columbia, Alaska border all the way to the California-Mexico border. Tsunami warning in Hawaii, and we also have tsunami threats across all of the Pacific Ocean, as far south as South America, parts of Asia, and Oceania there all the way down toward New Zealand, all the Pacific Islands. Just a lot going on here, and so we're going to watch it as we get data, as this tsunami starts to move toward Western Washington here. We're going to start by taking a look here at some of these different tide stations. You can see we're going to start here at La Push, and we're just going to keep updating these as we go through the next few minutes here. You can see nothing yet at La Push. We're just going to keep moving down the coast. One of the more vulnerable places for tsunamis is Crescent City, California. And I was actually just there on a trip a few days ago. Really interesting area, close to the Redwoods, pretty fun. You can see here we don't have the tsunami hitting just yet. You can see there's just typical fluctuations there in the water levels. Not very much. You can see similar thing there. La Push, we can go up toward Nia Bay in the northwest Washington coast there at the Strait of Juan de Fuca. We're getting toward high tide there. You can see we're at low tide right now and then starting to move back up. Not much happening there either. You can see pretty steady water levels, and we're just going to have to watch this over the next few minutes here. If we take a look here at the National Weather Service Seattle site, you can see where that tsunami advisory is in effect. So you got parts of western Whatcom County, parts of western Skagit County, Snohomish County north of Marysville there, Camino Island and Whidbey Island, the Admiralty Inlet area there, and you can see from the about central Jefferson County there northward toward Port Townsend, Marrowstone Island, and over toward Port Angeles along the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and then down the entirety of the Washington coast, and then that continues down the Oregon and California coasts as well. So to kind of just catch everybody up, if you are just tuning in here, what happened is we had a magnitude 8.8 earthquake off the coast of the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia earlier today at 4:25 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. That earthquake was 80 miles southeast of one of Russia's major cities on the peninsula there, so 80 miles offshore of the peninsula. And you can see these are some estimated tsunami start times. So, for example, we have Tofino, BC here starting approximately 11:30 p.m. Pacific time. That was about 30 minutes ago. But we don't really have that much going on up there just yet. You can see La Push, Washington, 11:35 p.m., but we were just looking at that tide station, and we don't have that much going on just yet. We're going to just keep refreshing this to kind of see once we start to get some of those tsunami related fluctuations, and you can see not yet. We're still holding true to those water levels as predicted, which indicates that there is not a tsunami coming in yet. However, if you want to see what the tsunami signature looks like, let's head south and we'll take a look here in Hawaii, because the tsunami is occurring there right now. So we can look here at Maui. Let's click on that. We can look at Maui here, and you can see in the water levels the very clear tsunami signature. Take a look at these oscillations. You can see we had about, we got down to about minus 2.35 feet there, and then it got all the way up to 6.75 feet. So you're looking at nearly a 7-foot tsunami in Maui there on the north side of Maui. And this is kind of what we've seen across parts of the Pacific Ocean. We saw a similar signature at Midway Island, which is to the west of Hawaii there. So if we look at Midway, I actually haven't looked at this one in a little bit, so we can see what's going on here. You can see how we had all these fluctuations with the initial few waves, and then we had this calm period, and then this could have caught some, if this were to happen in a populated area, unlike Midway Island, this would have caught some people off guard, how you had this next wave a while after it calmed down, and then it starts to calm down again. So that's a pretty interesting thing to see as well, and just a reminder of how dangerous tsunamis can be. Now, what we'll continue to do here is just watch along the west coast to see kind of any signatures of these tsunamis starting to move in here. You can see we can take a look at down on the Oregon coast, Port Orford. You can see we don't have any fluctuations there yet either. So going back to our ETAs, you can see that we're right around the time where this is going to start occurring for most of the Pacific coast of Washington and Oregon between 11:30 and midnight there. And you can see some inland areas like Port Townsend should start around 12:15 according to this. Port Angeles 12:15, Port Townsend 12:45, Bellingham 1:10, Tacoma 2 a.m. But here's something to note is that in Puget Sound, you're not really going to be seeing very much of anything in terms of waves. You're going to maybe see a few odd currents if you're out near the sound at 2 a.m., which most people are not anyway. And you're not going to see huge fluctuations in the water. It's likely going to be more noticed on instruments than with the human eye. So that is something to note as well. So thank you all very much for joining the stream. Be sure to put all of your questions in the chat there, and then also be sure to subscribe, to like, share. It'd be great to help this grow the channel some as well, so be sure to do that. I'm just going to post this on Facebook real quick. All right. Let's get back to business here, folks. Let me get the chat up here. All right. All right, there we go. Be sure to put your questions in the chat there. Like, subscribe, share, all of that. So what we're going to do is we will also take a look at some webcams. This is something that I like to do in storms and other types of events because it's interesting to just kind of watch things in real time. So this is Crescent City, California that we're looking at right now, one of the most vulnerable places on the west coast of the United States for tsunamis, as you can see, and that is because of the coastline, its shape, kind of what things are like. And you can see we got a helicopter flying there. And you can see the water's pretty calm. So there's not really much going on in Crescent City at the moment. Now, another place we can look a bit closer to home here is Westport, Washington. There's some really nice webcams here on the Experience Westport site, and we can scroll down here and watch these cameras. This one rotates around. You can see some waves there. As we're at low tide, the waves aren't reaching this jetty where you typically get some really cool waves splashing as we go into the winter months in some of our storms. Now, you can also take a look at this live marina cam. You can see it's pretty quiet there. Water is still, got some breeze, not much going on. So it's still pretty quiet, and that is what is corroborated here as we look at our tide stations. So taking a look here at the Westport tide station, you can see that our water levels are not indicative of a tsunami hitting the northwest coast just yet. So you can see there the water level is starting to rise with the tide as expected, and you're not having any other big oscillations like we were seeing when we look at, for example, the data from Maui, where you're seeing those big oscillations from the tsunami waves. But that is what we're expected to see to a lesser extent as we go into the night here across parts of the Northwest. So let's see, you got a question in the chat here. Port Townsend area, big risk for businesses at the Point Hudson Marina, work above a homeless shelter there, and we are worried. This is, once we get into Port Townsend here, so one thing we can note here, if we can take a look at the Tsunami Warning Center website, this will kind of give us the explanations that we want. So this is the Alaska, BC, U.S. West Coast advisory. So we can scroll down here and we can take a look at the estimated heights of the tsunami here. So you can see Port Townsend there that you were asking about, Nina. That is ETA around 12:45 a.m. and you can see less than 1 foot is the anticipated oscillation there in the water. However, I would definitely say what you want to do, like you were saying, don't stand within 20 feet of the shoreline. You may see in some marinas where the boats start to move a little bit, but this is, once you get as far inland as Port Townsend, it's going to start weakening quite a bit. And we can kind of take a look at this here. If we look at the map, it's always helpful to have the map open just to kind of see what is going on. So you can see as we take a look here at Port Townsend is all the way in here at the entrance to Admiralty Inlet. The tsunami is going to come into the Strait of Juan de Fuca and is going to be losing energy as it moves all the way down the strait. And then by the time it gets to Port Townsend, it's going to be much weaker. You're barely going to notice it, most likely. You may see some, like I said, some of those boats maybe moving in marinas a little bit, maybe some odd currents, but you're looking down here. A lot of it is also going to be kind of blunted by Point Wilson, which is going to decrease some of the impact there. But by the time the tsunami gets all the way to Port Townsend, it should have weakened quite a bit. But still, take precautions. That is under the tsunami advisory. And if you are under that advisory, that does mean that there is potential for there to be a few waves. So here, this is the actual definition of a tsunami advisory. It says a tsunami advisory means that a tsunami capable of producing strong currents or waves dangerous to persons in or very near the water is expected or already occurring. Areas in the advisory should not expect widespread inundation. Tsunamis are a series of waves dangerous many hours after initial arrival. The first wave may not be the largest, and that is something that we have seen across the Pacific Ocean, is that the first wave has not been the largest wave. and that is something interesting to watch. So let's take a look here. We'll take a look here on Twitter, and we'll look at some of the latest updates that we're seeing from across the Pacific Ocean, really, as we see what is going on. So we got also isolated dry thunderstorm fire weather risk. That is something we'll definitely be talking about in tomorrow's video, or actually today's video. It is past midnight, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Let's continue taking a look here. So we have a 6-foot tsunami wave recorded in Maui. It looks like we have a flooded parking lot that you can see here in Maui there, so that is something interesting to see. Again, fire weather, dry thunderstorm risk. That's not good to see for all the Cascades, Western Washington. Looks like we got my live stream there. You can see here a time lapse from, this is I believe from Kauai, where you had some of the water receding there. And you can see the reason why you're getting that increased tsunami there in Kailua and Maui is because of a bay that you have right here, and the water gets funneled up into that bay, which is where you get those bigger impacts. Now that is something that we can kind of take a look at on the Washington coast. If you're looking at places that are going to have a bigger impact, it's going to be where the water gets funneled in. So you can see you have a little bit of that maybe happening Gray's Harbor. You get it funneled in a little bit here, but a lot of the houses and everything sit so far back from the ocean that when you have a tsunami that is expected to be 1 to 2 feet, it's not even going to get anywhere close. If you remember the 2021, I believe it was, possibly, or it might have been 2022, I think, the Tonga volcano erupted in the South Pacific, and it sent a tsunami across the Pacific Ocean. You had small tsunamis that did occur in parts of the Pacific Northwest coast, but what you saw was that the water just ran all the way up the beach and didn't go into the dunes or anything like that. Nothing like we would expect from the eventual Cascadia subduction zone earthquake off our coast. So then you can see why, when you're looking at those bay scenarios, why somewhere like Crescent City, California, where you have a crescent-shaped coastline there, and then you have an additional harbor right there, is so vulnerable to tsunamis. Same thing with Brookings, Oregon. I was just there. I was actually just down by this harbor a few days ago on a trip, and you can just see how this coastline is so susceptible to tsunamis because it has this funnel effect there due to the shape of the coastline. It's similar to what we talk about with storm surge and hurricanes down in the Gulf when you have certain areas of the shoreline that are shaped differently. Let's see. Are there any theories regarding, in the chat here, are there any theories regarding why waves subsequent to the first are often more powerful? Could it be constructive interference of coalescing waves reflecting off of boundaries beyond origin? Essentially, what is happening is that tsunami is like, so we zoom out here, you can see where this first happened off the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia. The first waves are sent out, and they kind of bounce off of anything that they hit, and a tsunami is not just one wave. You have one wave that pushes out, and then you have sometimes waves that come right behind it because it's an earthquake. It's not just, one shake of the earth per se. You have a lot of shaking that's going on. You get multiple waves. The waves may start as one and kind of move into a pattern. And then what happens is you have the first waves hit the coasts, and then they bounce back. And then basically the Pacific Ocean becomes a giant bathtub, which is really the best way to describe it. So that's why they say the first wave is not always the strongest, because like we saw in the 2011 Japan megathrust earthquake that caused so much damage and death and destruction, there were 3 to 4 pretty big tsunami waves in Japan, and then you had multiple waves that hit the U.S. West Coast as well. So in this case, we've seen, and we can kind of take a look at it here in the, we can look at it at the Maui tide gauge, how you have multiple waves, and that second wave was the strongest one. And it just kind of depends based on the earthquake, and that's really the takeaway, is that it depends based on the earthquake it's how it's kind of going to play out. So let's refresh our graphs and start taking a look to see if we're getting any impacts, any fluctuations there along the Washington coast. You can see nothing really going on there in La Push. Go down to tsunami vulnerable Crescent City. and you can see not much going on there either. Pretty smooth still. Nia Bay, Washington, right there by La Push, but more on the Strait of Juan de Fuca side. You can see very normal water levels. You're not really trending any direction, staying just about where it's predicted. And you can see Westport, where we had that camera up just a few minutes ago. Nothing happening there. All good. So we can take a look back at the Westport cam. Let's refresh it and take a look again here. We'll take a look at the Marina camera. Let that one keep going. And you can see it is calm there in Westport. So not much going on. You do have that nice breeze, but other than that, it is still calm. Take a look at Crescent City, California. And you can see same thing there. It is calm in Crescent City as well. We can take a look at some more updates here on social media. Having a lot of waves going on in Hilo and Kailua harbors. So here, this is from Matthew Capucci, pretty reliable meteorologist here. So you can see he's saying a 9.1 foot change in water levels has been observed in Kailua Harbor, Hawaii. The first wave is not necessarily the biggest wave. You can see there are multiple waves there on that graph, and that is what the big hazard is. We can keep going here. You can see where those tsunami alerts are in effect. And yeah, so there is a lot to watch as we go here. So some of the places that are under the gun for this tsunami watch, we can take a look, or tsunami advisory, sorry. We're going to use the Weather and Hazards Data Viewer for the National Weather Service here, and with the new forecast zones from NWS Seattle, we're able to get a much better idea of the areas that are near the coast that could be threatened by a tsunami like this. So you can see right here, we're going to start in some of the more inland waters where tsunamis will be much smaller, if observable at all. You can see the shorelines of Point Roberts there, that little exclave of the United States, and then from Blaine all the way down the coastline here, including Lummi Island, the San Juans, all of those associated islands, Whidbey Island, Fidalgo Island, Camano Island, and then the coastlines of Whatcom, Skagit, and northern Snohomish counties. And then you can see on the western side, on the Olympic Peninsula, essentially you're looking from Port Ludlow northward to Port Townsend, Marrowstone Island, and then all the way along the Strait of Juan de Fuca out toward Cape Flattery. And then that tsunami advisory continues southward along the Washington coast, including Grays Harbor, and up the Chehalis River a little bit where it's really low-lying there east of Aberdeen. You may get a little bit of inundation there depending on how the waves come in based on the tide. Continuing down the Westport, North Cove, all of Willapa Bay, up the Willapa River, New Raymond, and South Bend, and then all the way around Willapa Bay, the Long Beach Peninsula, and then you get to the mouth of the Columbia River. This goes inland all the way to the border between Wahkiakum and Pacific counties, and then you have on the Oregon side, starting from Clatsop Spit all the way in through Astoria, and then back towards some of the islands here. This notably does not include Puget Island, which is in Washington there, so heads up there. This does not include Washington's biggest island on the Columbia. And then going down the Oregon coast, you can see all of the bays and inlets and rivers included on the Oregon coast, southern Oregon coast, Coos Bay, all of that. But then take a look here once you get to the border between Oregon and California, then you get into the tsunami warning from the Oregon-California border near Brookings all the way down through Crescent City, through Trinidad, Eureka, and then down toward the Mendocino County line. And that is because of the coastline here being much more vulnerable to tsunamis. You can see that shape of the coastline there funnels the tsunamis in, and Crescent City has historically had some pretty bad tsunamis. So that is why the Tsunami Warning Center decided to go with that elevated tsunami warning. So that is pretty interesting to see. Let's continue to update things. So it looks like we are getting an updated tsunami advisory. Let's take a look at that. Here we go. Let's refresh the tsunami advisory here. All right, 12:20 a.m. You can see we didn't change our ETAs much, and we're going to go and update the product right here. We should be able to get the newest one. Let's see. We might have to update this page that has been running terribly slow today. The tsunami.gov website has just been inundated by, no tsunami pun intended there, but this website has not been able to keep up very well with the incredible amount of web traffic. We're going to let that load while we take a look again at what caused all this. A magnitude 8.8 megathrust earthquake off the coast of the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia. For some explanation of where that is, you have Russia here, you got China, North and South Korea, Japan, and some of the islands of Japan here. This is Alaska and the Aleutian Islands, Bering Sea here, and this earthquake was right here off the southern part of the Kamchatka Peninsula. You can see the long rupture zone there. This is a similar earthquake to what happened off of Japan in 2011 and what could happen off the coast of the Pacific Northwest in that dreaded day when the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake happens. This is a very similar thing that happened here in Russia, and that is what caused this in the first place. You can see the intense shaking that occurred near the epicenter and along the subduction zone. This caused tsunamis up toward 15 feet in parts of Russia. You can see some of these coastlines just got hammered with the tsunamis because of their shape. And then we did get some tsunamis across parts of Japan, including Hokkaido and parts of Honshu, I believe. And then we started to see some tsunami observations across parts of the Aleutian Islands, and then some of Midway Atoll, and then over toward Hawaii, of course, where we're still getting tsunami observations right now. Now let's take a look again at some of our tide gauges on the Washington coast. This is, of course, what we're watching. You can see Westport. You're not getting much of anything there in terms of tsunamis. That is Hawaii. We'll move that one up front. We'll continue to see how things go on Maui. And you can see we're dropping quickly again as maybe another tsunami wave moves through Maui. And then you can see Nia Bay. Not much going on. Water level lagging down a little bit, but that does not look like a tsunami signature. Going down back toward Crescent City, California, again, one of the most vulnerable places for tsunamis in the United States, besides Alaska and Hawaii, and you can see no changes there just yet. And so basically kind of what we're seeing right now is that these ETAs that we got on that tsunami advisory are a little bit off. They're a little bit late, and that is something that we'll have to keep an eye on to see what happens in the next few hours here. I'm obviously not going to stream that long because I'd like to sleep too, but I did want to be able to talk about this a little bit. Here is something interesting. So we can actually, while we kind of wait for the tsunami to happen here, you can take a look here at some of the thunderstorm forecast for the next few days. This is from my friend Joseph Reynolds, graduate of the University of Washington just this year, and he's talking about the thunderstorm update here, so you can see his forecast overview for the next few days. Tomorrow or today, Wednesday, isolated thunderstorms in eastern Washington and the Cascades with that risk of dry lightning and gusty winds. And then you can see Thursday, this is when things could get a little bit more interesting. We have scattered thunderstorms in the Cascades and eastern Washington with favored areas around Wenatchee and northward into Okanagan County, expecting frequent lightning, gusty winds, and heavy downpours across parts of eastern Washington with those thunderstorms on Thursday, and rain and a stray thunderstorm possible around the Puget Sound area. That is something we have to watch, but it's still very uncertain. Like I talked about in my video, that this is not something that we can just say kind of with a slam dunk, like, oh yeah, there's going to be some thunderstorms on Thursday. There may be some showers, there may not be. This is a notoriously hard thing to predict across western Washington anyway, but especially during the summer. And then you can see Friday there we have isolated thunderstorms in northeast Washington and the northern Cascades. Risk of frequent lightning, gusty winds, and heavy downpours of rain and thunderstorms possible again around Puget Sound in the morning, I believe, but that is something we're going to have to watch. Let me check in on the chat here. Picked up my emergency radio today because of tsunami fear. despite the realization that I didn't have one ready to go in Portland. Well, yeah, this is a good thing. That this is something, I think this is one of the most important things that we can do here, is that even though this earthquake, obviously, look how far away this earthquake is from the Pacific Northwest, all the way across the ocean in Russia, but this is such a good reminder to us that we can have this exact same thing happen. We could be the people on the Kamchatka Peninsula because of our relative location to the Cascadia subduction zone, which goes right along the coast here from Northern California through Oregon, Washington, and Vancouver Island, and we could have this exact same thing happen. So that is why it's super important. If you live on the coast, if you live near Puget Sound, if you live in any of these bays or harbors, you need to have a tsunami plan, because we could be dealing with this exact same thing that the folks in parts of Russia have had to deal with because of how close that earthquake was to them. So this is really important, that you got to remember this could happen to us. We aren't always going to be dealing with distant tsunamis. We'll be dealing one day with a tsunami that will devastate the Pacific Northwest. And of course, it hasn't happened since 1700. When we had the last Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, so over 300 years ago, but it is something that we need to, or near 300, sorry, my math is a little bit off tonight, but obviously, very long time. You're looking at centuries between these quakes, and this is something that we need to watch closely. We need to see how these kind of things happen in other countries, in Russia and Japan, and in the terrible case of the Indian Ocean tsunami all those years ago in 2004. And we have to remember that it could happen to us one day, and we have to be prepared. So that is a good thing. That was my little rant on tsunami preparedness. So thank you, Fiska, there, for saying in the chat that you got a emergency radio. That is something that's good to have, even with the age of social media and all that. It's good to have an emergency radio just in case. Let's see, an Alien Mango, welcome to the chat, my friend. I've been watching live streams from Hawaii. It's mostly been a nothing burger in terms of waves, but there's been a significant drop of water levels in Honolulu. Yeah, that is definitely what's going on. It's the other thing that's happening in Hawaii right now, you can kind of see it on this map, is that the tide is going out, so you're not going to necessarily have super noticeable waves in terms of the fact that A, this is an earthquake all the way from Russia and you're getting the waves into Hawaii, and B, that the tide is going out, so the tide is receding anyway, and that is the thing that is going to be kind of interesting to watch. This is not just a normal tsunami, because you've got a lot of other things at play, and that's what people have got to realize, that there's a lot going on here in addition to just the waves from the tsunami off of Russia. You've got tides, you've got bays, you've got multiple waves, all these kind of things going on. So let's take a check on our webcams once again. We'll take a look at Crescent City first. You can see looking pretty calm there in Crescent City. I believe looks like the tide is coming in Crescent City. So let's take a look at that. Yeah, you can see the tide is coming in, but the tsunami signature hasn't occurred yet, because you just got the tide going along right as suggested. And this isn't really changing all that much. So, yeah, we'll keep watching this, because what you're going to start seeing is that tsunami is going to cause those water levels to drop and then rise and drop and rise. You're going to have these big amplitude changes as the tsunami moves in. All right, let me catch up on our chat here, see if we got any new messages going on. So I've been hearing about it since I was a child. San Francisco 1906 will look like a joke. Beyond magnitude industrial infrastructure failures, an entirely new set of horrors. Yeah, there are really just some disastrous effects that will happen when we get that Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. It's why it's important to be prepared at all times. Just to remember all the things that could happen. It's a very interesting thing. And it's something we don't really talk about that much, because obviously hasn't happened since 1700. So it was kind of just like something like Mount St. Helens. No one had really seen it erupt before. It was always kind of in the back of your mind that, oh yeah, that is a volcano. And then 1980 comes in and it totally erupts, and you see all the devastation that causes. And that's kind of the same thing that we've got with the Cascadia subduction zone. We have all these reminders of similar subduction zones across the planet. You got Indian Ocean, you've got this one in Russia, you had earthquakes off of the coast of Chile, you had obviously the Japan 2011 earthquake that did cause a tsunami that hit the west coast pretty bad in some cases. And those are our little reminders, but we never really think about the fact that it could happen right off our shores. So let's continue to take a look at some tide stations. We can take a look all the way over to the Aleutian Islands as well and kind of see what's been going on up there. So here's Adak Island. That is pretty far out toward Russia there, and you can see that they are dealing with those tsunami fluctuations as well right now. And I believe that the Tsunami Warning Center site should list some of this stuff. We can start with the latest advisory here. We're getting some of these updated ETAs remaining the same, but again, like I said earlier, we're going to want to push these back a little bit because we're not getting those, we're not getting it hitting right now. Obviously, you have La Push showing impact at 11:35 p.m. yesterday. We're an hour past that, and we're not really seeing anything in La Push. Nia Bay, same thing. We're almost an hour past when that impact was projected, and we're not seeing anything. You can see California, Crescent City, up to 5 feet. That is pretty crazy. And now we can see, this is what I was looking for. We can see some of these tsunami heights. You can see parts of Alaska getting tsunamis under a foot, 1.5 feet in Atka, that is in the Aleutian Islands, 1.4 feet there in Adak, and then parts of Russia. This is not entirely accurate based on when the tsunami that actually hit Russia right after the earthquake was over 15 feet in some cases. So Midway Island, you can see 1 foot tsunami, but some of the oscillations were higher than that. So you're getting just a lot of movement in the water, a lot of things shifting around at one time, and that can really cause some problems in some of the bays and stuff as well. You can see, we can take a look at the tsunami warning that is in effect for Hawaii. You can see that we're getting some more observations here coming in about the different amplitudes. You can see 4 feet in Halewa Bay, that is on the island of Kauai. You can see 3 feet there in Hanalei. I believe that is, I'm not sure where Hanalei is. Midway, 3.1 foot oscillation there. The Dart buoy off of Russia, 3 feet, and that is an open ocean. 3 feet in open ocean with a tsunami shows that it will definitely be higher once it gets to land. So you can see the places where we have a warning. The Oregon-California border, still, you can see that little patch of red right there. And then, of course, the state of Hawaii. And then you can see the threat for all of the Pacific Basin, which is pretty interesting to watch. That there's a lot going on across all the Pacific Ocean in terms of these tsunamis, but you're not going to get a ton of observations out of all that. So let's continue to update social media, see what we're getting in. Here's thunderstorm outlooks. Let's take a look at this. So this is from Shannon O'Donnell of Como News, another useful site for monitoring wave data. Pacific Islands Ocean Observing System. Initial tsunami waves are 3 to 6 feet, but could grow as more energy gets bunched up and shrinks the wavelength and boosts the wave height. And that's what happens as it moves closer to shore. So let's take a look at this website that Shannon linked here in her tweet. So wave observations, we can click, let's take a look at Hawaii, and we'll look at Hanalei. So that is off of Kauai, and we can take a look at that and just kind of see what kind of waves we were looking at here. Buoy is running on low power connections. That's not good to see, and doesn't really look like that is working. I think that's kind of safe to say. Let's go over here to Hilo, Hawaii, infamous for some really, really bad tsunamis. There's devastating things that have happened there. You can see those tsunami oscillations happening there in Hilo. And this is because the bay that really just funnels the tsunamis in. They had an absolutely devastating event after the Prince William Sound earthquake in 1964. Just huge problems. Let's see, got some messages in the chat. Thank you for doing this, watching, because I'm worried. Don't be too worried about this. I just want to encourage everyone, this is not something that's really going to have a huge impact across Western Washington. You can see our area here, those areas along the coastlines in the brownish color, reddish-brown color there are under the tsunami advisory, but the waves are not going to be very big. And so just be sure to take this as a time to refine your plan in the case of a much bigger tsunami in the future, but also to remember that this is not something that's going to be causing huge amounts of damage or destruction here in Western Washington, thankfully. Leon, welcome to the chat. All this fun and possible lightning this week too. Yippee. Seriously, hope everyone stays safe. Yeah, I hope everyone stays safe with this tsunami too, and we definitely do have some lightning potential. And while we're at it, I don't think anyone's going to be opposed to looking at the latest Euro run and taking a look at where some lightning is possible over the next few days. So we're looking at 3-hour lightning flash density. You can see Wednesday afternoon, you got chances across all of the Cascades, especially the southern Cascades there. And then as we go into Thursday, this is when things get interesting. Like Joseph was talking about in that tweet we read earlier, look at this thunderstorm chance across parts of eastern Washington. You're looking here at Grant County up toward Ellensburg and Wenatchee there. And then that chance just continues, scattered thunderstorms all across eastern Washington, diminishing as we go into the night there. And then you get it again across northeast Washington. Look at Spokane and some of those areas as we go into Friday afternoon. That's just a ton of lightning out there. And that's not good because some of these storms are not going to be particularly rainy. We could get brief downpours, but you could get even more lightning, and that is going to definitely spark some more fires. That is pretty likely to occur because look at this, all the way through Saturday, you had all those storms out here on Friday, and you're only getting a few hundredths of an inch of rain. And this is really quite bad because we could be dealing with some significant dry thunderstorm potential here. Even Puget Sound not really getting any rain here. If we look at some of our more high-resolution forecasts, we may be able to time some of this out and look at when some of this rain might occur. You can see some areas get a little bit more rain with some of these storms. Let's take a look at our future radar here. As you go into Wednesday morning, you start getting some of those storms very scattered, maybe a few across the mountains. But then take a look at Thursday. As you go into Thursday morning, look at all this activity moving north. And then see that line of storms that forms there. 2 to 3 p.m. Ellensburg, Wenatchee, maybe out toward Moses Lake. See how that moves north and up into the Cascades. You get some remnants of that in the way of just some rain across parts of western Washington. Maybe a few more showers there. And then as we go into Friday, you can see Friday at 5 a.m. This is where this forecast cuts off, unfortunately. You can see some of these thunderstorms starting to maybe form off the Cascades, moving toward western Washington. We'll see how that plays out. Take a look at the HRRR, high-resolution rapid refresh model. Typically our best in terms of timing out this precipitation. You can see Wednesday afternoon, southern Cascade thunderstorms and up in the northeast mountains as well. And then take a look as we go into Thursday, a few scattered showers across western Washington, early morning hours. And then as we go into the afternoon, take a look at some of these storms popping off across parts of the Cascades into the evening. Does not show as much coverage as the NAM does, though. So that is where we're looking at this disagreement in the models. It's very difficult to forecast thunderstorms across western Washington, especially in the summertime and when you're dealing with storms with little precipitation. Leon says, I'm in Auburn, so real curious if they get close. Looks like a rumble with fading convection, as you're saying. Yeah, it's still pretty uncertain at this point, but rumble with fading convection, definitely a possibility. But who knows about Friday morning? We're still kind of out of the range of those high-resolution forecasts, and we may get a couple of stray storms moving into the lowlands, so definitely something to watch. Let's take a look again at our tide buoys here. Take a look at Crescent City, California. Oh, and there we go. Now you can see we're starting to get that spike. It's subtle. It's about a half foot, but we are starting to get a spike there. Let's refresh the webcam and see if we can see anything. Not too much. You can't really see much going on there. but you are starting to get a spike in Crescent City. Let's check Westport here. And there it is. You're starting to get that tsunami signature very, very slightly in Westport, but you are starting to get that rise above where the water levels were. Let's continue to go up our coast. Nia Bay. Here you can see, there you go, there's that water level rise. So it is starting to happen here on the Washington coast. Let's refresh the Westport camera here, and we will look at the marina and take a look at what's going on currently. You can see water still looks pretty calm. It's going to take a while for this to become noticeable. If we go here and look at the other Westport camera, this one just kind of circles around, and so it may at some point be able to show us what's going on, but not much on that one. Excuse me. Whew. Let's take a look at, I think we have some more webcams down here. We might have one down in Lincoln City, Oregon. Let's see what we got there. The live coast camera, KATU weather. Let's see. You got the, you can see the waves coming in there from the inn at Spanish Head, but that is, it's not really showing us that much. We can try Cannon Beach, Oregon live camera. There we go. We got Cannon Beach webcam. Let's see, the Haystack Rock camera, you can see absolutely nothing. Alright. Oregon Coast webcams. Let's take a look at this. This is it's kind of what watching storms in the Northwest is all about, finding as many webcams as you can online and just watching the storms. Live Cannon Beach camera, that's an old video, that's not helping. Haystack Rock camera is dark. Astoria camera not displaying. Let's take a look at the Tillamook Head webcam. Let's see if this website works. Doesn't look like it. Lincoln City, it's dark. Otter Rock, you're not getting anything there. Newport, that looks like someone's home. Sea Lion camera. Doesn't look like we're getting much here. So Boone's Ferry Marina webcam, that's in Portland. Alright, well, that's not going to be of much help to us. So let's just take a look at Seaside. Let's check that. Seaside, Oregon live cam. Let's see what we've got. Seaside Chamber of Commerce. I think I've looked at this before. That doesn't exist. All right. Seaside Beach and Historic Prom. Let's see if we've got. I don't think that one's going to work for us either. All right, let's take a look again at Crescent City. We may be able to see something happen, and we'll see. Doesn't look like much motion in the water or anything like that. If the 5-foot inundation does occur in Crescent City, we will definitely be able to see that on this camera. You see, it looks like we may have a kind of a harbor entrance right there. Not exactly sure what this camera is looking at. Westport, we can refresh this one and take a look at the marina again. There you go. That's looking back through town toward the marina. You can see not much going on. Pretty quiet in town right now. Marina looks pretty quiet. You got some vessels in there, some pretty bright lights around some of the boats, but not much going on in terms of water movement. But we will take a look and see. Not Alaska, not Hawaii. Let's go to California and see how this starts to update. definitely increasing in Crescent City there. We'll take a look at Twitter and see what is going on here. There's some flooding in Hilo as tsunami waves hit Hawaii. That is kind of an expected area that would happen given some of Hilo's problems in the past. Take a look at that. That is some decent flooding there. Let's see if we got any updates about Crescent City. Boats leaving the harbor earlier in Crescent City. Here we go. National Weather Service, Eureka. The first tsunami waves are beginning to impact the coast, with clear waves being recorded at the Crescent City and Humboldt Bay tide gauges. Waves will continue to build in through the night and will become more dangerous as we approach high tide. Stay away from the beaches. So yeah, you can see that tsunami starting to hit Crescent City there, and we're a few hours away from high tide still. So this is going to be something we'll need to continue to watch as we go through the night. And then you can see it at Humboldt. That was Humboldt Bay. This is Crescent City. We're a few hours from high tide, and it's not a particularly high tide, it looks like. But you can see that is about a half a meter so far in terms of water level rise. Let's take a look here in Washington. Take a look at Westport yet again. You can see it's starting to rise there. You're getting about a half foot so far. It'll likely continue to rise there and fluctuate, and we may not get those bigger waves until much later in the night. Maybe you're looking at like 2, 3, 4 a.m. as it still kind of bounces around here, and by that time you may get some very, very little fluctuations all the way into Puget Sound, as far down as Tacoma, maybe even a little bit further there. But in the Puget Sound, it's not going to be anything destructive or anything like that. You may notice some interesting currents. You may see some boats maybe move around a little bit in some of the marinas. But this isn't going to be something that's going to be super noticeable, besides looking at actual gauges and kind of seeing how things happen as those little impulses of the tsunami move through. So again, where is this in effect for? Take a look at this from the Canada-US border in Blaine there, all the way down through some of the inland waters of the northern parts there, from Bellingham down toward Whidbey Island, and then west along the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and south from Cape Flattery all the way to the San Diego area there at the U.S.-Mexico border near Tijuana. So clearly the entire U.S. coast of the Pacific Ocean is under the gun for tsunami potential. And also point this out too, red flag warning in effect for parts of the eastern slopes of the Cascades, and that is in effect on Wednesday, likely going to be continuing on Thursday, as we have thunderstorm potential and dry lightning possible over the next few days. That's something we should take a look at while we're talking about it. Take a look at some of this dry thunderstorm potential here. Let's look at the day one fire weather outlook. Look at that dry thunderstorm potential almost extending into western Washington, right up along the Cascades, all of eastern Washington. Critical dry thunderstorm potential over parts of eastern Oregon, northern California. Take a look at day two. That does include Seattle there in that isolated dry thunderstorm risk. And it barely includes Portland to Eugene as well. You can see if we put the interstate highways on, you can see it does barely include Seattle. So this is definitely not a good thing to see, that such a huge part of western Washington, or Washington state overall, parts of western Washington, most of eastern Washington, all of eastern Oregon, is under that dry thunderstorm risk for 2 days in a row. That is not a good sign, and that is definitely something we will have to watch in the days ahead. Well, we're just about nearing 1 a.m. here on the West Coast, and I've been streaming about an hour here. We're starting to see the tsunami here. There you go. That is about 2 feet of tsunami rise or 1.5 feet almost in Crescent City. We may be able to see a little bit. Let's take a look at the camera again, see if we're starting to get anything happening here. Let's make it full screen. You can see got a little bit of light on the jetty here. That wasn't there earlier, so I wonder if there is some vehicle or something over here pointing at the jetty. Let's see. We'll just keep watching this for a little bit, see if we see anything going on here. This is live in Crescent City. You can see some low clouds. You can see we got some lights on. And we had a Coast Guard helicopter look like flying around earlier, but I'm not really seeing that. Not really seeing that right now. Doesn't really look like there's too much motion that we can see in the water from this this angle. Looks like there might be some people walking around there, but take a look over in Westport, Washington. See what's going on. We are starting to get some water rise there as well. There's the tower cam. Anyone ever been to Westport, you'd know the viewing tower there. And then if we look at the marina, you can see we haven't seen much of anything going on there. Now let's take a look. Let's update social media again, see what's going on. Here's an important thing. Again from Shannon O'Donnell. Nice graphic from New Zealand illustrating how the energy from waves propagating into a shallow shoreline translates into increasing wave amplitudes, creating a tsunami. So in the open ocean, tsunamis are not huge waves. They're just normal waves that are traveling very fast. And you can see as they get closer to the coast, they build and build and build as the shoreline kind of cramps them a little bit, and that's why certain areas based on the shape of their shoreline can have hugely different tsunami heights. And that's like why Crescent City, for example, is such a area to watch in terms of tsunamis and how big they can get and all of that. You can see then as they get closer to the coast, they get higher and higher. That is one of the biggest threats with the Cascadia subduction zone quake potential, is that it's just going to be this super, super high tsunami for some localized areas. So yeah, there's definitely some stuff going on. You can see Westport, not really any activity there at the marina, just a really calm night. You wouldn't really know that a tsunami is heading that way. See Crescent City. Not much going on there either, although the water is definitely rising. That is very safe to say. You can see in Crescent City just a really quick spike there in the water levels. And this is just possibly the first wave. You can see actually that first wave is starting to go back down. So you're already getting some of those oscillations, which is really interesting to see. And it's very cool to watch this stuff full time or in real time. So pretty interesting to see it just happen. You know, it's not every day that you can that you get to see this kind of stuff going on. We will take a look here again at the Washington coast, see how these kind of, see the uniformity or not of some of these tsunami waves. You can see there, same thing happened in Westport. You had a little bit of a rise, and then it just kind of knocked down again. Take a look. Let's refresh Nia Bay, see if we're getting any tsunami signature there. And you can see it there in Nia Bay. Tsunami makes a little increase and then it decreases. But you can see the problem here on the Washington coast. You're not going to be able to see all that much because it's right at low tide. And you can see the same thing is likely going on there in the Quileute River at La Push. Now you can see a little bit more noticeable in La Push. It goes up and then down and then up again. Let's take a look while we're at it over here toward the strait. So now all the way down toward Port Angeles. And what I expect to see here is that nothing is happening. And that is exactly the case. Nothing is happening in Port Angeles. You're getting toward low tide. These tsunami waves may very well hit right at low tide, possibly, or a little bit later. As you go further inland, they'll weaken, they'll get smaller. You can see if we take a look down here at Port Townsend. Yep, we're getting toward low tide there as well, a little bit later than in Port Angeles. And so a lot of these waves are going to be hitting, or just these little oscillations really are going to be hitting at low tide, maybe a little bit after low tide. You can see here down by me here in Tacoma, they'll be hitting as the tide gets lower. So really, this is not a big deal for the Puget Sound. It's really more of a coastal thing. Let's take a look at the Oregon coast. I don't know if I've got anyone on here watching from the Oregon coast, but here we go. We got like 5 tide stations in Newport, but let's click one of them and see what's going on. There you go. You see that same signature, that first impulse of the tsunami wave there in Newport. If we go down the coast, I was just in Coos Bay. Really nice area, very interesting. Here's the Charleston, Oregon, basically Coos Bay tide station. They're right on Coos Bay before you get to the city, and you can see, looks like we had a spike of about a foot there, and then it started to decrease yet again. Take a look at Crescent City, see what's going on. It's like whatever vehicle was sitting over here has left, and you now don't really have as good of a view. What would be really nice is to have some sort of time-lapse mechanism here to kind of see how things have changed over the last few minutes. You can see Westport there, looks about the same, not much going on. Nice breezy evening, but that's about it. Another thing that's been kind of interesting to watch too is just the sheer amount of aftershocks that we've been getting here in Russia. So you had that magnitude 8.8, but then take a look at this. I mean, look at some of these aftershocks. You got magnitude 5, 5, 5, lots of magnitude 5 to 6 aftershocks, 5.7. That's pretty decent all on its own. We had, I believe, in magnitude 6.9, 6.9 and 6.3 aftershock. And then, that, of course, there was the 8.8. And I believe there was a foreshock as well, which was a couple days ago. We had that foreshock on the 20th, I believe. So nearly 10 days ago, which is pretty interesting. Let's see. Walter says nothing happening in Dungeness. Yeah, Dungeness Spit is an interesting location in terms of potentially getting some water rise, because, I mean, obviously it sticks out more into the Strait of Juan de Fuca than anywhere else. But in terms of the actual town of Dungeness, it's going to be blocked by the spit, most likely, make it a little bit moving around it. But it's not going to be that noticeable once you get in toward Port Angeles, Port Townsend, Victoria. It'll maybe be a very small little bit of a surge there in the water, but nothing more than that. So here you go. You can see from National Weather Service Seattle, the first tsunami waves have arrived over the last 30 to 45 minutes at both La Push and Westport, as shown on the tide gauges. Keep away from the water and shore until local officials say it is safe to return. You can see those little impulse happening there in La Push and that rise in Westport as well. Here is a time-lapse video from Coconut Island in Hilo. You can see the water over here. So let's see. There you go. See that flooding there in the parking lot? That happened as the tsunami waves moved in. And that's a little bit of water there. You can't see the stripes in the parking lot anymore. So you can see this is definitely causing some impacts, especially there in Hawaii, where it is definitely more vulnerable than here in Washington. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. That's kind of what I was just talking about. Like, it would be nice to see some time-lapse imagery. Not much else really happening here. Honolulu port clearing out after the tsunami warning. That's good to see. Take a look at Crescent City one more time. I think I'm about ready to wrap up the stream here. It's 1 a.m. We're not seeing all that much happening in terms of watching webcams in the middle of the night. But just wanted to reiterate that you have this tsunami warning, or the tsunami advisory in effect for the Washington coast, Strait of Juan de Fuca, and then the island county parts of Snohomish, Skagit, and Whatcom counties, and the San Juans. And this is not a very impactful event for Western Washington, really. In all things considered, much more impactful for some parts of California, depending on coastline shape. You may have some boats moving around in marinas, some strong currents at times, maybe some waves running all the way up the beach across the Washington coast, but this is happening in the middle of the night. There's not really that much going on. There shouldn't really be people out there. Along the strait, it's going to weaken as it moves inland, so it'll be bigger in Port Angeles than it will be in Port Townsend, and it will continue to weaken as it gets all the way down toward the southern part of Whidbey Island. It's just not going to be that. It's not going to be that much as we get all the way down toward Everett here. You see, this is kind of interesting to note that we have southern Whidbey Island under a tsunami advisory, but Everett right across the water is not under that advisory. You can see Camino Island, and then parts of Snohomish and Skagit counties up toward Island County, San Juan County, parts of Whatcom County's coastline as well. But by the time it gets over here, you're looking at less than 1 foot of oscillations there, maybe a half foot if you're lucky this far inland. And for some reason on the tsunami advisory, Tacoma is put on there as a tsunami getting here at 2 a.m. It's going to be later than that for one thing, and two, you're not even going to see it. It's not even going to be visible. You may get a few interesting currents, but it's going to be so dark you won't be able to see any of them. So biggest impacts may be on the coast, but not that much, even in terms of the biggest impacts. You're going to have the much bigger things happening in this warning area here between the Oregon-California border and the Mendocino County line there, including Crescent City and Eureka. It's a pretty interesting thing to see how different parts of the coastline react differently to these tsunamis. You had the bigger things happening in Hawaii as well, but this is the area to watch. If you're watching for tsunami impacts, you're going to be watching Crescent City to Eureka. Some of those bays in there are definitely where the biggest impacts are going to occur. We'll take a look one more time as that first impulse starts to end in Crescent City. You can see now you got the water levels dropping again, and likely that second stronger wave is going to move in here momentarily in Crescent City. And again, not super noticeable on these webcams and stuff like that. You can see same thing in Westport, starting to drop back down a little bit. We'll keep going up the coast a bit here, Nia Bay. We got that spike a little bit and then the drop. But again, with low tide, it's pretty difficult. It's pretty difficult to see it going on at all. La Push, not much there. You can see a little bit of a second impulse there in La Push, but smaller. And then Port Angeles on the strait. Yeah, there you go. Not much happening there yet because it hasn't even gotten there. So if we take a look at some more updates here online, National Weather Service in Los Angeles has announced that the tsunami has reached the California coast. You can see significant recession of water in Maui. That's pretty interesting. Look at how much it receded. And then you had, I believe, a 9-foot tsunami wave. But then again, that is all relative because so much of this receded and then it comes back in and then it's recorded as 9 feet. So it's not exactly something that you can just say 9 feet full off. This here is something you shouldn't do. This is really not smart at all. These people are standing out here in the receding water. That's dumb. Don't do that. You really don't want to be that person who goes viral for doing something stupid. And standing where the water has receded from a tsunami is definitely not smart. So we can take a look again at all the places this is impacting. You see the red icon here is that 8.8 earthquake off the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia, and you can see how it's impacted the entirety of the Pacific Ocean basin. You got the purple markers being places where our Tsunami Warning Center in the United States does not issue alerts, but does say that there are threats. You can see those the red markers there in Hawaii being the tsunami warnings, and then tsunami warning there in Northern California, and then the advisories for Alaska and the United States and British Columbia. And that is essentially our situation report. It has remained the same over the last few hours. We're Let's see, I hope the crust moving doesn't affect our plate as energy spreads across the Earth. That's generally not how this works, thankfully. We've had a lot of big quakes on the Pacific plate before that haven't triggered the Cascadia subduction zone. I am not remotely anywhere close to being an expert on earthquakes, but that's not really something that we've heard of before, of having earthquakes on one side trigger earthquakes on another side. It's one interesting thing that can happen is big earthquakes can actually extend the length of the day by like less than milliseconds, but it has been measured, and that's a very odd and kind of interesting thing to look at. But the biggest thing that you're going to be seeing from this quake is some tsunamis, and the biggest ones, of course, in Russia. You had tsunamis over 13, 14 feet, up toward 15 feet in some places, maybe higher based on some of the buildings we saw getting swept away and stuff like that. And again, for anyone just tuning in, this is what happened. Magnitude 8.8 earthquake off the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia, 4:25 p.m. Pacific time. It was a megathrust earthquake. You can see the elongated area of shaking because an entire fault line ruptured there. And then it sent the tsunami, of course, right onto the Russian coast, and then it fanned out across the Pacific Ocean and is just now reaching the Pacific coast of the United States and British Columbia. There it's almost 12 hours from when that earthquake happened. So this is pretty interesting to watch, and it's been interesting to see these observations come in from places like Wake Island, from parts of Japan, the Aleutians, Hawaii, of course, getting hit pretty hard, but not hearing too many reports of any like major damage, which is pretty good to see. And then it's just starting to hit the West Coast. Let's continue to see any updates here. And now this is something super exciting to see here. My friend Michael Snyder, Pacific Northwest Weather Watch channel here, he just reached 100,000 subscribers. This is incredible to see. I was proud to be one of the first 50 subscribers to his channel multiple years ago, and he just reached 100,000. He is by far the best in the business here in the Pacific Northwest, and we should all definitely congratulate him. Be sure to get on to Twitter, Blue Sky, and send your congratulations to Michael on hitting 100,000. I'm going to write the congratulations right now to Michael. So that is really awesome to see. So big congratulations to my friend Michael there. Let's see, is it going to hit Washington hard? No, this tsunami is not going to hit Washington hard. If you look at the Tsunami Warning Center and you look at our alert, you can see that the estimated height of the tsunami is about 1 foot, maybe a little bit less than 1 foot. And this is, and you can see Tacoma, it shows nothing because it's not going to be observable. So this is not going to be a significant impact on the Washington coast. Something to point out is that, for example, if we take a look at a place like Ocean Shores, so you can see you got Ocean Shores, the town here, you got a pretty big area of dunes, and you got a pretty wide beach. And the thing that happens with these kind of tsunamis is they'll likely run up this whole beach and then maybe start to sneak onto the beach approaches, but it's not going to be something where it's like breaking through the dunes and like inundating the town or anything like that. It's just going to cover up the whole beach. And then if you go into some harbors here, like you can see Westport, tsunami will come in. You may notice some bigger waves splashing across some of these jetties. You may see some strong currents moving in across some of these breakwaters, moving some of the boats around, jostling them in their berths and stuff like that. That is the biggest thing that you will see in Washington with these tsunami waves is those currents. And you may see some brief water rise, but it's mainly the currents that are going to be the biggest things. And most people aren't going to be able to see it because it's completely dark. So by the time we get to the morning, we should have much less in the way of tsunami waves. You may still have some fluctuation of water levels, but likely less than what you could observe with your eyes, and it will be more of something that you can observe only by looking at these plots here from the tides and currents on the NOAA website. And there we go, you can see you getting that second wave there in Westport. But see that? You're looking about less than a half foot. And that is verifying the predictions of a 1 foot or less tsunami for Western Washington. Take a look at Crescent City. This should be much bigger. They have much higher tsunami potential there. And you can see you're already getting a 2 foot wave there. Hope maybe we'll be able to see some currents on this camera, which I doubt. But, this is the live Crescent City camera. Doesn't really look like we can see much there given the fact that it is nighttime and it doesn't look like there's much going on. But if it were daytime, we may be able to see some currents and stuff in Crescent City, but not much going on right now. We can take a look at Westport yet again. Let's refresh this here. And you can see nothing really going on. Pretty quiet there in Westport. And then if we continue looking at a few places on the coast of Washington here, Nia Bay, you can see a little bit of fluctuation, but barely anything, about a half foot at most. And then we can take a look here at La Push. And you can see La Push definitely getting some oscillations there, but it is noticeable in how it differs from the predicted water level. But again, about a half foot. So this is verifying our predictions. This is showing that you need an earthquake stronger than a magnitude 8.8 to cause tsunamis on the west coast. Answering question in the chat, any chance this goes crazy? Not really. You're not going to see anything more than 1 foot in Washington. In a very, very unexpected case, maybe something near 2 feet, but even that has not caused much damage. In the 2011 Japan quake, which was a magnitude 9.0, one of the biggest quakes ever recorded in world history, there were tsunamis that hit the west coast. Places like Brookings, Oregon, Crescent City, California got hit pretty hard, but the Washington coast did not get a big impact from even a bigger earthquake. So with this being a smaller earthquake in a different location, we're even less likely to see impacts. Now, if this was a quake of this size in the Gulf of Alaska, we'd be having a totally different discussion right now. We'd be having significant tsunami impacts if that were to happen. And to answer that second question, who's getting it the worst? That would be right here, the Kamchatka Peninsula coast. You had waves near 15 plus feet. Hawaii got some pretty big waves as well, but nothing compared to what you're seeing in Russia, where you're having some buildings being floated away and stuff like that. Some pretty significant stuff going on there. And thank you, Leon. Now we need to get you there. That'll take quite a while, but while you're watching, be sure to like and subscribe, share the channel here. Be sure to tune in. I'm doing weather briefings all the time now. We got fires going on. We got thunderstorm potential. We got dry thunderstorm potential, which could just bring a lot more fires. We have smoke in the area, and we may even have heat in the next few weeks. So we definitely got some stuff going on. And then, of course, hopefully another active storm season coming up here. Every weather enthusiast would like to have another active season, but we don't really know what's going on with our storm season forecast right now. So definitely stay tuned over the next few months as we start to as we get closer to storm season here. See Sarah asking about Monterey Bay there. We can look at Monterey, California, and see what's going on there. That is another area that can be a little bit more vulnerable to tsunamis based on just look at the shape of Monterey Bay. Let's take a look at Monterey there. You can see pretty decent tsunami oscillation there in Monterey Bay. But again, just because it looks big on the graph doesn't mean it's really that big in what you'd actually be seeing here. You're looking at 1 to 2 feet maybe in Monterey Bay, which is not enough to cause significant damage. We go down toward Monterey here. You can see you got some pretty decent beaches here. You may see places like this where you got a marina. You're going to see some strong currents coming around breakwaters. You're going to see maybe some bigger splashing waves. You could see some boats getting tossed around. And some of these places, I've been down here, Cannery Row and stuff like that. You may get some wave splashing and stuff, but this tsunami shouldn't be anything more than what you'd see in a big storm. Now, some places like this, like Moss Landing, where you've got this really narrow inlet, there you may see some waves moving up these sloughs and creeks and rivers and stuff like that. Santa Cruz Harbor is a place that is definitely vulnerable to tsunamis. We had some harbor flooding in Santa Cruz during the Tonga volcano tsunami. So places in here like Santa Cruz Harbor definitely could be having some flooding, could have some water backing up into some of the creeks. But even that shouldn't last for too long and shouldn't be too significant. Now, of course, that may change. California is not going to have any big impacts for a while now because we've got a lot of stuff going on. But California is a little bit on the later side in terms of when this tsunami is going to hit. You can see here, Monterey, California, we're kind of guessing that things are going to be about an hour later than what we're looking at right now. And so you can see this ETA of 12:15 a.m. An hour later, but it'd be about 1:15 a.m., which is about right now, and that is kind of when we saw that hit. But you can see less than 1 foot from Monterey Bay. But look at that, 2 to 5 feet for Crescent City, and that is kind of what we're seeing right now. So we'll take a look at Crescent City one more time here. And you can see there, you're getting that oscillation of about 3 feet. So definitely some stuff happening in Crescent City. Wouldn't be surprised to see some inundation there, up some creeks, maybe up into the bay a little bit, maybe even into some parts of town briefly. Crescent City is the most vulnerable point on the Pacific coast. Anywhere other than that is not going to be seeing major impacts. Again, besides some of those currents and some boats moving around and stuff like that. And that may be kind of what you see if you were standing right here in Westport watching constantly, not just checking in periodically as we are here. You may see some of these boats move around if you were to time lapse this or something like that. But again, it's happening at night. It is pretty far away and the tide is going out. So the Washington coast is favored to have lesser impacts, and that is something good for our coastline. So yeah, that's the situation. There's the earthquake. There's the tsunami alerts, and this is definitely not something you see every day. We don't have huge earthquakes along the ring of fire that often. So when you do, it's definitely something you want to talk about and something you want to kind of watch and see how it plays out. But we're getting a pretty good picture of this event right now, and what's happening is pretty clear that this is not a massively damaging event for the West Coast. This is definitely going to be hard for Russia. There's going to be some parts of Russia that are going to need some recovery time from this for sure. Hawaii may have some areas of damage, maybe around Crescent City, California as well. And other than that, this is likely just going to be some larger waves, some big currents, some boats moving around in some harbors, maybe some brief inundation up some bays and creeks and rivers like that. But it's also happening in the middle of the night. And for places in Washington, it is happening around low tide, which is helpful as well. So yeah, thank you all very much for watching. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, be sure to like the stream. Please subscribe to Western Washington Weather and stay tuned for all the stuff we've got coming up in terms of our weather conditions, especially a chance of thunderstorms and dry thunderstorms. Lots of stuff happening with that. And then be sure to share the channel as well so your friends can also stay tuned to what's going on across our beautiful area that is Western Washington. So thank you all very much. I'm going to end the stream now and head to bed. It's almost 1:30 in the morning. I will talk about this a bit more in my video tomorrow. Maybe look at kind of a recap, and that's it. So thank you all very much for watching, and stay tuned to tomorrow's video and the videos coming up, as we've got some interesting stuff going on across Western Washington. Thank you, everybody.